Last week Is that Hey! It's a shiny Tandemouse. And boy, does it sure ever suck. But how exactly did that happen? Why are some shinies simply amazing, some are simply just okay, and some are simply terrible? Let's talk about that by discussing the highs and lows of shiny Pokémon. And while we're at it, I'll tell you what my favorite and least favorite shiny Pokémon for each generation are, and you all tell me yours in the comments. Good? Great. Now class, please excuse your old professor for telling you things you probably already know, but for those that don't, the very first generation of Pokémon games were on the Game Boy, which weren't in color unless you count everything being green as color. And also, shinies didn't exist. But when they were introduced in Generation 2, and they were retroactively applied, we got some that were pretty terrible, including the franchise's mascot, as well as the second most recognizable Pokémon from the anime. By my estimation, there are basically two types of bad shiny Pokémon. Ones that hardly change at all, and ones that get demonstrably uglier. And for the former, it all harkens back to the poster child from Gen 1. One of the most beloved Pokémon in the game's history, Gengar, whose shiny looks like it was left in an abandoned shop window that faced the sun until all its vibrancy and life faded. And as for the best, I know many of you want to see Charizard here in all its black dragon glory, but for my money, I gotta go with a shiny that injects so much personality into an already memorable Pokemon design, Drowzee. Moving on to the generation that started the shiny craze, and there are some truly terrible shinies here. Sunkern and Sunflora helped kick off the grass types on the verge of death trend. Granville is such a disappointing evolution of shiny Snubbull, and Togetic is barely noticeable. But for my money, there is no greater betrayal than shiny Phanpy. Another example of the left out in the sun shiny design, but with Phanpy it just seems cruel because he has so much personality. He's such a great first stage evolution. Why'd they do my boy dirty like that? As for the best, my gut tells me to go iconic and choose Ho-Oh, first ever shiny appearance in the anime, mad respect. But I'm just a sucker for eye-popping goofballs, and it doesn't get any goofier than shiny Magcargo. There's no reference here to purple lava, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's just ridiculous and I love it. Now class, before we can begin, we must first discuss some of the theories involving shiny Pokemon design. I say theories because when it comes to the why of shiny Pokemon, there isn't a lot of concrete data to point to, particularly in the early days of Pokemon. But what is commonly accepted is that there are approximately two eras of shiny design. Gens 1 through 5, which I'm calling the era of a nebulous design, and Gen 6 onward, which I'm calling the era of intentional design. Now, what do those terms mean? Well, from Gen 6 onward, there are clues that have been taken from various interviews with game developers, which indicate that a Pokemon's shiny is designed by the developer who designed the actual Pokemon. But what about before Gen 6? Were those shiny Pokemon not designed? Well, I'm sorry to say, but it isn't precisely known. Not only because Game Freak is and has always been notoriously secretive, but, well, it's design information, something done behind the scenes that can't be unearthed simply by digging into the game's code. So for Pokemon shiny designs from the first 5 generations of games, most of what's commonly believed is theory, the most prominent of which involving color palette swaps, meaning a Pokemon's shiny colors were dictated by its non-shiny colors using some sort of algorithm that changes according to the Game Boy Color's color palette. So blues become purple or pink, purples or pinks become blue, greens become brown, browns become green, yellows become orange, etc. The problem with this theory, however, is, well, the inconsistencies. Psyduck is yellow and turns blue, while Pikachu is also yellow and becomes this. The other problem is that some Pokemon evolutions retain the color of their pre-evolved form, but their shinies don't sync up, like Ponyta and Rapidash or Slowpoke and Slowbro. There are a lot of competing theories and arguments and an entire rabbit hole you can drill down into. People have put a ton of work into researching this with some fascinating findings. I'll link them in the description and absolutely recommend them, but the simple answer here is that shiny Pokemon designs for generations 1 through 5 are, and will be for the foreseeable future, largely still a mystery. And hey, speaking of mysteries, if you enjoy diving into mysterious rabbit holes, then you'll love Noirlem, my noir detective graphic mystery series set in 1920s New York, where a string of murders are investigated by Detective Coleman Carmichael. You can check it out at Barnes & Noble, the link in the description. Short self-promotion over. On to Hoenn, which for the sake of transparent biases is my favorite generation. And when you zoom out on the history of shinies, Gen 3 stands out as one of the high watermarks. There's so much contrast everywhere you look, from Pokemon like Sableye, Breloom, Salamence, except for this Disco Chicken. Yeah, Blaziken is the worst. I don't know how you can take the time to design something like this and then not want to play with the colors a bit more, but there you go. And as for the best, there's so many good candidates. Hariyama looks outstanding, Roselia is iconic, but I can't in good conscience put the crown anywhere but shiny Metagross. The way the shining gold accents culminate into this final evolution, chef's kiss. Moving on to Generation 4 and the era of bland. You almost get the sense that the developers saw how much cooler Pokemon looked in the Gen 3 shinies and, like a teacher trying to calm down an unruly classroom, were like, we need to chill with this. The Piplup line, the Hippopotas line, Cherubi and Cherum, the Burmy line. Look at how they massacred my boys, Shellos and Gastrodon. There's also shiny Pokemon that just look a little darker. The Shieldon line, the Snover line. But there can be no greater crime against shiny design than the pseudo-legendary Garchomp. The line gets off to such an amazing start, as Gible receives a more vibrant blue and an accent of green. Then a darker but still crisp blue for Gabite. Then, a Garchomp faded in the sun. As for the best shiny, well, changes in color that pop are hard to find here. So when they do, they feel that much more impactful. Glysaur is a pretty great shiny, so is the Drifloon line. But for my best shiny in the Sinnoh region, I gotta go with Stunky. Vibrant pink replaces the deep purple and a cream color replaces white, which causes the contrast to stand out more. Good stuff. Onto the Unova region and the last generation of the previously mentioned nebulous design era. And wow, the developers certainly seem to have rediscovered their affinity for color. Not nearly as many faded color palettes as previous generations, but one of those does stand out as being the culmination of disappointment. Gothitelle. The entire Gothitelle evolution line is, from start to finish, a massive disappointment. A good idea that was poorly executed from the jump. There's so much you could do with the goth aesthetic, but all we got was an ugly mess. Also, why isn't it a dark type? So of course the shiny had to be as unappealing as possible, with little in the way of alteration aside from purple. No contrast, nothing interesting, disappointing. One of the things that stands out from Gen 5 shinies is how they can go from bad to great within an evolution line. Trubbish? Meh. Garbodor? Awesome. Scraggy? Terrible. Scrafty? Hell yeah. But my favorite example of this is the Litwick line. Pretty bad shiny, not much better, perfection. It's like the complete opposite of the Gible line, while nailing the theming of its dual ghost fire typing. Incredible. And now we enter the era of intentional design. And I gotta be honest, I kinda see it. Chespin's line no longer has the standard take the grass starter and make them look like they're dying approach. Fennekin's line doesn't look like a fire starter with a slightly different shade of orange. Froakie, well, Froakie still looks like the standard slightly faded water starter. But all over the Kalos region there's a pop. I mean, look at Go-Go. Usually with a shiny, all the colors move in the same direction. But here we have a green turning darker, a brown turning lighter, another brown turning darker, and a gray turning gold. Pangoro has one black turning brown and another turning red. And Hawlucha is all over the place. But despite these excellent shiny design decisions and a move towards dynamic colors, this is also where we see the birth of a new, and in my opinion, terrible shiny design trend. The shiny attribute. This is where the color of a shiny Pokemon doesn't change at all, save for one small attribute, like Kamala's drum, Tinkaton's hammer, and the worst shiny in Kalos, Flabebe. I appreciate a Pokemon whose evolution carries a theme, but the whole Flabebe line is just weird. First it's holding a flower, then it evolves and is holding a different flower that's the same color, then it becomes the flower. I'm sure there's some evolutionary biology explanation for this, but flowers have some of the most extensive color diversity in nature. Heck, Flabebe itself comes in several different colors, so why does the shiny hardly change? And as for the best shiny in all of Kalos, despite there being a plethora of great shinies, There is only one answer here. The greatest pseudo-legendary line in the entire series, the Gumi line. It starts off great, continues the shiny theme, and only gets better with each evolution. Perfection. On to Gen 7, where we see something interesting happen with respect to color. The Alolan region was heavily influenced by Hawaii, a place whose aesthetic is widely known for bright, vibrant colors, and this is reflected in the Pokémon. But the effect this also had on design is that many of the shinies lack the popping, vibrant contrast of generations past. So you have a Pokémon like Beware and Oranguru, whose shinies have completely different colors, but the difference isn't as stark because both colors are vibrant. As for the worst shiny in Gen 7, I gotta go with Popplio. I don't know what it is about water starter shinies that Game Freak despises, but good lord do they ever. It's like they designed Mudkip and decided no one can ever come close to competing with him. And as for the best, it pains me to pass over the Jangmo-O line, truly one of the best shiny lines ever, but one Alolan Pokemon just barely pips it, the Sandygast line. A Pokemon's shiny turning black has always been aesthetically pleasing, but coupling that with the mystique of black sands, chef's kiss. Moving on to the Nintendo Switch era and the land of Galar, and at this point I'm going to accuse Game Freak of something with absolutely no evidence whatsoever. But just as the vibrancy of Hawaii led to vibrant Pokemon design, the United Kingdom apparently inspired the developers to create shiny Pokemon with all the excitement of beans on toast. Blipbug, the Nickit line, the Yamper line, the Roly-Poly line, the Silicobra line, the Hatina line. My god, are you trying to put me to sleep? Why is everything so gray? And amazingly, none of these are the worst, because I can find no crime greater than shiny Caporaja. Look at how colorful and vibrant this creature is and all that could be done with its palette. Not to be dramatic, but how dare you? And as for the best, I gotta go with Zamazenta. Both the box art legendaries have legendary shinies that show a clear vision for the design. Both are blue and red, albeit one softer than the other, and for both shinies, instead of swapping them or modifying them completely, they chose one of those colors and altered their tone. Great shiny design. And finally, we end up precisely where we began, in Paldea, staring down the barrel of a shiny Tandemaus that you can just barely tell is shiny. And the Tandemaus line isn't alone. The Charcadet line is bursting with design elements and seemingly no thought put into its shiny. Bombardier, Flamigo, the Bramlin line all find the same fate. But you also have shinies like Cloth and Orthworm, Wiglet and Cetitan that show amazing contrast, and I think that's sort of the point with shinies now. In the real world, there are all sorts of things that human beings consider valuable, even if it doesn't always make sense. People do inhumane things to one another for diamonds, even though diamonds themselves aren't really all that rare. If you were to try and map out what is considered valuable and why, you'd end up with a flowchart that doesn't lead anywhere or make any sense. And shiny Pokemon have become a reflection of that. You boot up a Pokemon game and every Pokemon that spawns in the world carries with it a tiny percentage of a chance that it will be shiny. And on those exceptionally rare occasions, sometimes it will look incredible, sometimes it will look okay, and sometimes it won't look special at all. But if you take a step back and think about shiny Pokemon and why people enjoy them, the answer to why bad shinies are designed becomes apparent. We enjoy them because they are rare, but also because they are different from what we know. So if those differences are always great, they would inherently become less great. In essence, just as there has to be non-shiny Pokemon in order for shiny Pokemon to feel special, there has to be bad shinies so that the great ones can truly shine. But what do you think? What are your favorite or least favorite shinies? Let me know in the comments, check out my book at the link in the description, and as always, stay safe out there, trainers.